Hey guys, in the previous video, we created a weather app using Next.js. You basically had the luxury of toggling between imperial units and metric units, but no data was persisted throughout your application. In today's tutorial, I'm going to tell you exactly what data persistent means and what it actually represents in our weather application. The textbook definition of data persistence is the ability to store and retrieve data even after the application or program that created that same data has stopped running. But guess what? I'm not going to bore you with some technical jargons, so I'm going to give you a very succinct example of what data persistent actually is. Do you remember the last time you did an online shopping on a very famous website like Amazon or eBay or Alibaba? You probably added some items to your cart. You placed the order and everything was good to go. Sometimes customers forget to actually finalize their order, so they accidentally or deliberately close their browser's tabs. The user may log back in later on and still have access to all those items that were previously added to the cart. So nothing is actually forgotten. There are a variety of different mechanisms to persist data throughout your application, and I'm going to talk about some of them in this lesson. I will specifically delve deeper into one of them as well. What does data persistent have to do with this weather application? We actually need to let the browser remember the units. So once you close the tabs, it will still remember whether you close with imperials or the metric units. There are a variety of different ways to persist data in a Next.js application. For example, you can use your local storage or server-side rendering with a database, or you can take advantage of client-side rendering with an API. You have always the luxury of using cookies, because that's a very common practice in this industry, or you can take advantage of, some state management libraries, such as Redux, or using third-party services. I'm going to give you a brief overview of what each methodology represents and specifically stick to the first approach, which is the local storage. Using local storage gives you the ability to take advantage of the browser's local storage to store data, which is a simple key value store. But it comes with some shortcomings, so I think it's worth mentioning that the data is limited to the browser, and if it is cleared, or if you clear the browser's cache or cookies, you will definitely lose access to that data. There are some scenarios that this method is a good one, and of course there are some situations that you may stick to a more sustainable approach. Another approach is to use server-side rendering with a database or SSR. So what basically distinguishes Next.js from React is its SSR capability. So if you are creating an application which heavily relies on SEO and search engine optimization, I think Next.js has done a great job doing this using server-side rendering. To persist data using this approach, you can take advantage of non-relational databases such as MongoDB or a relational database like MySQL or PostgreSQL. It is also worth mentioning that the data is stored on a server, and when the user requests a page, the server retrieves the data from the database and renders the page with the data. Unlike the previous approach, where you lose your data once you clear your cache, the data will be available on any device, and it is not lost if the user clears the browser's cache or cookies. The other approach is to use client-side rendering with an API. In this method, the client sends requests to the API, which stores the data on the server and returns a response to the client. It is also a good method for cases where you need to store data that is specific to a user and needs to be available on any device. So regardless of the kind of device you are using, whether it is a mobile phone or you're using a PC, you can make sure that your data is persisted. Another way to persist your data is by using cookies. Cookies are actually small pieces of data stored on the user's browsers, which can be accessed by both the server and the client. Something that separates cookies from the other methodologies is that they come with an expiration date, so the data can be persisted for a specific amount of time. This brings us to another way to persist data. You can go ahead with a state management library such as Redux or MobX. As long as you're using one of these libraries, you can have access to data in a central location where every component can easily access the data stored there. However, it comes with some shortcoming. Depending on the complexity of your projects or the size of your application, it can be an overkill. So make sure not to use it for small projects or the projects that comes with less of, complexity or sophistication. Let's wrap it up by a brief overview of third-party services such as Firebase or AWS. There are lots of other great services through which you can easily retrieve data without having to set up your own server or database. In this tutorial, I'm going to specifically focus on how to use local storage in order to persist data within a Next.js app. Stay tuned, let's start coding. The reason why we decided to use the first approach, the local storage to persist data for this application, was that the kind of data that needs to be persisted is not of quite significance. All we have to persist is to let the browsers know whether we need to have access to the imperial units or the metric units. In other words, if I close my application while I have toggled the imperial units on, it will remember or it will persist this data. We basically use the local storage to store users' preferences, such as language, theme, or even the night mode. So the kind of information that is persisted using local storage is something trivial. Even if in a hypothetical world, a hacker hacks into your browser, all he's left out are some non-essential information. So make sure to use this approach for non-essential information. In this example, I have decided to have everything in imperial unit. So basically the default value must be in Fahrenheit and miles per hour. I'm going to go ahead and enter LA. And as you can see, everything is in imperial. Now I'm going to close my browser and open it again and would expect to have access to imperial units as a default value compared to previous times where I use the metric units. Basically, I expect that this value is persisted throughout my application. Let's close the browser and open it again. Going to the local host again. And as you can see, this time it's in imperial versus the previous time where it was in metric units. Basically, this value was persisted. I'm gonna toggle back to metric and close the browser and reopen it. Let's reopen it. Go to localhost. And look at this. This time it's in metric. So basically, the data is persisted again. There are two methods in JavaScript to have access to the local storage. First of all, you need to set or attribute that value to the local storage, so it is somehow assigned to it. As you can see, by using setItem, you can first dedicate a particular name. It can be any name as long as it is in string format. So any custom name. And then the second argument is the kind of value that you need to persist throughout your application. And still, the type is string. Once you set that value, you need to have access to that value. So by using getItem, you can have access to the same custom name value above. The best way to learn anything new is by giving examples. So I'm going to focus on some really applicable examples through which you can absolutely internalize this concept. I'm going to click on here, click on inspect, or you can definitely click on F12 if you're using a PC. Go to the console, clear everything. So let's define a string here. I'm going to call it hello, and the value will be, what's up guys? Now I'm going to store this value using local storage and setItem. We can name it. Any name is possible. I'm going to go ahead with hello with capital H. And the value that's going to be saved is this string. Let's enter. And now all you have to do is to go to the application tab under the local storage. As you can see, there is a key. The key was the word hello with capital H, and the value was the one that we already set. Now, let's try to get it this time using get item. So I'm going to call it new value, a new variable. Let's call it new data. So local storage, this time we're going to get that value. So get item is the one we use here. So the name was hello. I'm going to use the exact same hello with capital H, that custom name, the first argument in the previous command. Now I'm going to console new data. Let's see what it brings. And look at this. It's just bringing us the value which was already set down here. Now, if you open the application, it's still there. So the reason that we were able to have access to this value, this imperial or metric value, was that it was somehow stored on our browser. And this is exactly where it is stored, under the local storage, that URL, and there's this key value pair. Okay, so as a matter of fact, the value that you store using set item is not just strings. You can have access to a variety of different formats like objects or booleans. But something that matters is that at the end of the day, the value that's going to be here on the second argument of the set item should be a string. On the other hand, whenever you want to have access to that value, it still needs to be parsed. So it gotta have access to its original value. Let me give you an example and tell you exactly what I mean that you have this luxury of using variety of different formats. So I'm gonna go ahead and define user. This time, user is an object. It's got a name. Example, Joe Duke. I'm going to attribute age, say 29. Salary, for example, 100K. So the values here are numerical or integers. Let's add a Boolean value as well. Member, say it's true. Okay, we have an object. Now, let's store this object. I'm going to use local storage. Set item. Let's name it any value. I'm going to call it user with capital U. I'm not going to straightly use the term user here because it's not in string format. Instead, I need to stringify it or convert its format into a string. I'm going to go ahead and use json.stringify and put user, the object there. Enter. Let's just get back to the application tab. And look at this. This new value, this object was added to the local storage. So we have now access to two keys here, hello and user. Let's assume that you want to somehow have access to this user value. So you remember from the previous sections that you have to use get item. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Let's console.log local storage and get item. So the name was user with capital U. But wait, I'm not going to use this format because this does not bring me the original format that I'm looking for, and instead it will bring me a different format. So it's somehow stringified, right? But the original format was not a string. So instead, I need to parse this value. So I'm going to go ahead and use json.parse and put everything there. And look at this. Now I have access to the original format, that object that I had previously defined. As you can see, the name is a string, the age is a numerical integer, salary is an integer as well, and the member is a Boolean value. But if I had I not done this before, I would have never had access to that original format. So it's critically important to use json.parse and JSON stringify properly depending on the situation. Let's wrap this up by giving the last example. This time I'm going to define a Boolean value. Let's call it bool, and the value would be false. I'm going to use local storage, set item, call it bool with capital B, and store bool there. Once again, this is not a string. So let's see what's been stored there. I'm going to get back to the application and look at this. There's this value false. So you probably think everything is okay with this term, right? It's false, it's a Boolean, but let's just give it a try. Let's just test it. I'm going to test to see whether it's a Boolean value or it's a string. So let's console.log local storage, get item, and bool with capital B, the name or the custom name. I'm going to use type of, and let's see what the type for this new value is. So, ironically, it is not a Boolean value. If I want to have access to the original format, which is Boolean, I have to parse it. So I have to go ahead and use json.parse and then put everything there. So I'm gonna console.log json.parse local storage get item. The name was bool with uppercase B. And I'm going to have access to its type. So let's use type of. One parenthesis is left out, so let me add it there. Enter, and look at this. This time, instead of string, it brings us a Boolean in the original format. And if you want to remove everything from the local storage, you can go to Application tab and click either on the Clear All to clear everything, or you can select either one of them and then click on this Delete Selected. So I'm going to delete everything. Let's get back to our main application. What we want the user to experience is that when he or she clicks on the toggle for the first time, a value should be saved on the local storage. Let's give it a shot. I'm going to click on this Imperial unit for the first time. And look at this. This new value, Imperial, is saved as true. Now, if I just toggle it on and on, it automatically changes from false to true or from true to false. Another important thing is that when the user closes the tab and reopen it the second time, this value should be already saved on the local storage. So I'm going to close this tab here. So the browser was closed. Now let's reopen it. I'm going to go to localhost 3000. And this time, this is already saved. I'm going to draw your attention to the toggle code. So there was this input and the type was a checkbox. On the onChange event handler, we had handle checkbox. And once you click on this toggle, this handle checkbox function was triggered. What I want from this handle checkbox is to create a mechanism that can tell the browser to save that imperial unit. So it's like, hey browser, please remember this value once the user clicks on that toggle. For that matter, I'm going to use localStorage.setItem. Let's call it imperial. And it's going to get this value. And this, you remember, this value was coming from the imperial, the initial state of the metric or imperial unit. So once the user clicks on that toggle, it is converting it into its opposite value. If it's true, it's converted to false. If it's false, then it's converted to true. But there's something wrong with that. You remember, it's not going to be in string, so I'm going to stringify it. JSON.stringify. Now, once the user clicks on this toggle, this handle checkbox is triggered. The imperial is set to the opposite value. And at the end, it is letting the browser know that it should remember that imperial. I'm going to save it. And this brings me back to the second phase. The second phase was when the user closed the browser and reopened it, we actually want him to have access to that value, that imperial value. So I'm going to go ahead and define a use effect. The dependency array is going to be empty because I want it to be triggered once the user opens the browser for the first time. I'm going to define a new value. Let's call it stored value. This is stored value. We'll have access to this imperial, which is already saved on the browser. So I'm going to use local storage, get item, and imperial. Okay, if this is the very first time that user opens the browser, this does not exist, right? Because no one has already clicked on that handle checkbox. So it will be a null value. On the other hand, if this is the second time or the time that the user has reopened the browser, there is something. So I'm going to define a conditional here. I'm going to say if stored value is not null, in other words, if there is something stored on our local storage, then use set imperial, this function, and put this stored value there. But you remember, this is a string because it comes from the local storage. We have to parse it. Okay, now the second phase is completed as well. So to give you a quick recap, I have actually defined a set item for that handle box. So once someone clicks on that toggle, it actually converts the imperial value to its opposite. If it's true, then it will turn into false and vice versa. And if someone closes the browser and open it again, this use effect checks whether there's any value stored on the local storage. If there is something, then that value will be automatically set to the initial value of this imperial. If there is nothing there, if it's literally the very first time someone opens that browser, then this stored value would be null and nothing will happen. Let's save it. Open the browser again. Let's go to the application section. Application tab is here. I'm going to open the local storage, go to the URL, and as you can see, there is nothing there, nothing is saved. I'm going to click on this toggle and would expect to see something here, and look, Imperial is saved upon clicking on this Imperial unit toggle. As I click on and on, it automatically converts from one Boolean value to the opposite. So I'm going to leave it to Imperial. Now I'm going to close it. I'm going to close the browser. Let's reopen it. Go to localhost. And look, it automatically opened with the Imperial unit on. I'm going to go to Application tab, and once again, value is already saved. If I turn it to false and close it again and then open the browser, it still opens with this value being saved, so everything will be in metric. And this is how you persist data using local storage. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel and give it a thumbs up if you like this video. I'm committed to providing you practical tutorials that you can use for your next interviews. If you have any question or suggestion, please feel free to leave it in the comment section below and I will make sure to get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much.